Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of episode 2 of 18-Minute Experts, the podcast that dives into the minds of industry leaders in the wonderful world of group benefits. I'm your host, Matt Butters, and today I'm joined again by Karin Pooley, who's ready to share her experience and insights on the topic of communication and behavioral styles. But before we jump into the conversation, a quick reminder to our listeners. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. You can also catch us at www.peoplecorporation.com/18minexperts. If you're ultra generous, please leave us a review. Your feedback guides us as we try to provide the best benefits-focused content. Now, grab your headphones and let's jump in.
So if you look at a high D, right, the dominance trait, they tend to be very strong. They tend to be very direct. They tend to be very forceful. So I always like to use the example that when you go into a room and there's a number of people around, there's that one person that has that very strong presence. And then when they shake their hand, they'll look you directly in the eye and they're going to have that strong handshake, right? When you sit down with them in your meeting, you're having your first client meeting or prospect meeting, they may lean back in their chair or they'll cross their arms and they'll be very direct and very to the point for the most part, right?
Absolutely.
And so you don't want to be intimidated by that style because it's natural human behavior to start to put your guard up and think, wow, this person may not like me, especially if you're a high I, right?
You take it personal, yeah.
You do take it personally and you think they're scrutinizing you or criticizing you or whatever the case may be. So in recognizing that, the one trait about a high D is with them getting to the point, they don't want to hear all the fluffy stories necessarily, right? They just want the information. So what you can do is respond to them in that manner. So if they're direct and to the point and they're asking you a question, be direct. Get to the point, right? If you start to go around in circles, it could be frustrating for them. You could lose their attention, right?
Sure.
And you'll have to try and bring that meeting back. A high D tends to like to also maybe control the meeting, lead the meeting. And when you're in a meeting with a client, you really want to be in a position where you can lead the meeting but spend the time listening to your clients, right? So that's another important asset or a factor. So with an I always say I'm a quintessential high I. I'm super easy to read, right? I talk with my hands. I'm really fast paced. I talk a lot. People would describe me as outgoing.
Right.
I like to meet people, right? So a high I, we love people and we love to be liked. We don't like it when people don't like us, right? It's really important for a high I to develop rapport. So if you had come in and met with me, and I'm a high I, and hey, Matthew, nice to meet you. And how's the weather? And how was your trip in? And you got right to it. I'd probably be put off right away because you're not spending time to get to know me. So spend the time to get to know me, right? With a high S, you're going to see they're pretty even keeled and they'll be very accommodating and they'll be very empathetic and polite, right? S's are very team focused. They're about what's best for the organization. How can we accomplish this? So in that situation, you really want to just mirror their style as well, right? And just even keel. Don't be too high and don't be too low, right? Just really spend the time to listen and be calm, and you'll get a lot more information in the meeting, and they'll find a lot more value from it as well. And then finally, the C style is analytical. They tend to be reserved. Sometimes the C style can be confused with the D style, right? They can be very reserved, sort of unemotional maybe, right? Like what you see is what you get. And so a high C likes facts and data, right? So that might be the client that you're working with where you start to present your figures in terms of previous successes with clients in similar industries or sectors, right? Start with, let me demonstrate to you how we do this and show you how we do this, and then you can get to the other pieces. So once you recognize them, you can really, and those are some pretty easy ways to do it. You can really start to develop that rapport, I believe, quite quickly.
Karin, where were you 15 years ago when I started my career in sales and could have used that information every single day, right? Because, as soon as you're going through those quadrants, the DISC, I'm thinking of people that I know in my personal life, people I know in my professional life. And I'm also kind of, going through the old Rolodex, all my memories of maybe times where things just weren't clicking. And I perhaps attributed that poor experience to maybe something I did, rather than not recognizing we just weren't aligned on how we both wanted to communicate or how one person prefers to be spoken with versus spoken to. That's kind of stuff's invaluable. And our listeners too, our target audience for this podcast are people that can use that on their day to day. Not to mention the people that the advisors work with are typically business owners, HR, the people that could
Yeah.
use that formal psychometric testing in their hiring practices, in their team building. So, now we're getting the tools from you, obviously, on how to recognize these behavioral style in others, right? So we know how to align with those styles. What are the benefits of aligning and kind of co-opting those different styles when you now know what they are and you're able to recognize them? What kind of value comes from that?
I'll also just make one more comment, Matthew,
Yeah,
to what you mentioned about, thinking back to some of the customers that you would have worked with and not aligned with. And that's the, incredible thing about working with people, right? And I'm a consultant as well. And sometimes you just don't click with a particular client, right?
of
It
course.
just doesn't happen. You just don't click. And in recognizing that and having that self-awareness and confidence, I think that's when you can go to your colleague and say, you know what, we've got a really good opportunity here. I don't think necessarily I'm the best fit. Will you come with me on this call, right? Let's partner on this call because I think the two of us together can really be a great combination for this particular client. And that's the self-awareness. So in answer to your question about the mirroring, it first starts with self-awareness, right? And it starts with being vulnerable and humble to say, okay, Karin, you talked way too fast and you're really energetic. And sometimes that just puts people off, right? Like, so you just need to tone it back a little bit. So recognizing that and what your own style is really, really important. And so when you're mirroring, and mirroring is a really common phrase in sales, right? And prospecting, the one thing you want to be really cautious of is you're not mimicking, right? You're
Okay.
just trying to flow and have a rhythm with that particular client. So with the D style, they're strong and forceful and direct, and you can recognize that style. So you just want to respond in the same way, but you don't want to, if they sit back with their arms crossed, you don't want to sit back with your arms crossed, or you don't want to put a bit of a scowl on your face to make it seem like you're trying to be dominant, right? But I think it shows when you're able to do that and have that self awareness and mirror those styles, it shows empathy, right? I mean, empathy in I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, Matthew. I appreciate that you're trying to get the best out of this. And I'm naturally curious. I'm curious about your business. And I want to show you that I'm curious about your business. And I'm going to take the time to listen to what you have to say first and foremost, which is the most important thing we can do when we're meeting with our clients, right? So and it shows that you're confident. It shows what our lane is, right? We know we're the experts. You brought us in for this, and give me that audience or time to be able to demonstrate that to you. So I personally think I think it's a polite way of interacting with somebody as well, and it's recognizing them and who they are as an individual.
So you bring up a really good point, right? Because self-reflection oftentimes is really challenging to do. Nobody really likes to be criticized, and especially so nobody really likes to do some self-criticisms. But you brought up a really good point in that you're not really recommending anybody become a chameleon. Once you identify your best communication style, you can use that in different ways to interact with others. You don't necessarily have to start acting different than what's natural for you, but just recognizing it, maybe bringing in other people into the fold. You talk about, some of your clients are building teams, right? Being able to have a balance and knowing and resources that can help you and supplement what you're good at rather than you trying to be a jack of all trades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Karin, you bringing up the self-recognition of your own style and bringing other people into the fold to kind of help supplement the way you like to communicate or who you're communicating with to make it more effective reminds me of a story from when I was early on in my career on the sales side. I am admittedly, I think I fall under the I category like you. I'm fast, furious, a little bit bold, and sometimes I come in a little bit hot. And I think early in my career, maybe I just didn't recognize that wasn't a one size fits all, right? It wasn't the unilateral approach to dealing with others. I like it because that's what I always do, and that's how I like to be communicated with. It's the type of people that I resonate with the most. And I did a lot of pointing and not a lot of self-reflection. And I went into a couple of meetings with advisors that I worked with, and I just came in a little bit too hot. And I thought that there was something wrong with them. I said, why am I not landing? Why is this not resonating? And we moved on as restructuring happens. Another sales rep came into the fold. They took over the relationship with that particular advisor. this person would have been, the yin to my yang, right? The white to my black. And oftentimes when you're looking at team composition, you're looking to build a balance. Like you said, that's exactly what your role is in terms of hiring. And so kudos to my manager at the time for bringing in that balance, because this person just didn't operate the same way I did. And the success that they had with the relationship where I admittedly failed was astronomical. And it never really clicked for me why that happened. I took it a little bit personally at first, but now hearing what you're saying, it helps me to understand that, I was coming in with a little bit of tunnel vision. If I knew what you've kind of explained today about how some people like to communicate a little bit differently, or even just kind of recognizing those differences quicker, I would have been able to approach it from a more team perspective, bring somebody into the fold rather than me, flying too close to the sun, crashing and burning, and then bringing in somebody completely new to sweep up my mess and then redevelop the relationship. But it's really interesting, and hopefully we can give that sort of epiphany to some of our listeners today about maybe, they're in the course of a relationship already, that they can kind of self-correct a little bit and use this information and these resources to reestablish and deepen a relationship where maybe it wasn't clicking so far. So that's some really interesting information that you shared. And hopefully it resonates with some people that are listening today as well.
I think that is that professional wisdom that we end up getting the longer that we've been in the business. And I think it's really, really common, especially for individuals that are early in their career, to do that, right? Like you have a lot to prove earlier in your career. You're nervous, right? Starting to meet with clients, you have targets that you have to achieve. And it's hard sometimes to admit early in career, and even now sometimes later in career, when you don't have that connection with somebody, right? And for HR Solutions, early in the start of People First, what we used to do is always have two people to a call. You could never go on a call without having a second person there. And part of the reason why was exactly for that reason, right? Some people can connect and some people don't. Your odds of connecting with the client are going to increase exponentially if you have another person there.
Strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers. And I also think that, and you hear this all the time, right, in sales. And I think a lot of people just go in and start talking right away without spending time listening. And I remember what some of the best, simplest advice that I got from our first CEO, Lori, was, you know what? You don't bring in an order book. You just sit there and you listen and listen and listen and listen and you take notes. That's all you do, right? And I think that's fantastic advice, because you're actually spending time to get to know your client, and then you got the time to read the cues, right?
That's a great point, right? And maybe even the thesis of you being the communications expert on the podcast today is listen, listen, listen. It's the key to recognizing who you're dealing with. And then from there, they're empowered with the knowledge from today's podcast to integrate their own style or bring in the resources again to best deepen the relationship with the prospect. It doesn't have to be sales, right? It could be completely personal too. But if you want to have those impactful relationships, which everybody does, not just everybody that's listening on this podcast, there's a lot to learn from these kind of assessments and recognizing these different styles.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about the styles with a high I, they want to be talking about personal, right? They want to be talking about the cottage on the weekend.
Absolutely.
So, and everybody and every client, and I'm sure you've come across this as well, their prospect or business leader loves to talk about themselves, right? They love to talk about themselves.
Absolutely.
They love to talk about their business. They want us to be curious about their business first before we start to get into what we can give them or what we can provide or whatever the case may be.
So, Karin, most of the listeners to this podcast are insurance advisors, right? That's what we're targeted for, and that's the information that we're looking to share. So, the advisors today, they've kind of learned how they can recognize some of these personality traits, communication styles, et cetera, in their clients. But their clients are also the same as your clients. It's business owners, teams of HR. So, would you recommend that our insurance advisor listeners recommend formalized psychometric testing to their clients as well in order to, maybe hire better, build better teams? What do you think about that?
100%. I do. I would, and I do currently. So our clients come to us because we're trusted advisors, right? We're there to guide them not only in one specific need that they have, but holistically for their organization and people and retention. It doesn't matter what we're there for. It doesn't matter what our position is, including the advisors, of course, right? So to have another opportunity to be able to present another tool in your toolkit that's going to help strengthen their organization, help them retain individuals and improve the recruitment practices is only going to be a positive conversation, right? And can result in something great. you want to start with asking, do you use psychometric assessments? Do you use behavioral based assessments? What kind of assessments do you use? And you may hear them say, oh, I use the disc style. And somebody says that to me, and I'll respond with, okay, well, I'm ID. What are you? And then right away, you start to engage in this conversation. And then, if not, you can start to open up the questions of how do you recruit? What about retention? If you had an opportunity to learn more about your employees and their behaviors and their communication styles, would that be beneficial? And then start to have the conversation about the tools. Some organizations use, some don't, but it's an excellent way to open up another conversation with your client that isn't just focused on, your ultimate goal at that meeting.
Well, you know what? Some of the most effective and competent and successful insurance advisors that I've ever worked with are ones that didn't just work on a client's benefits or a client's insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the advisors that partnered with these HR teams and the business owners from a business perspective as well. When you have that full reach, when you are able to wrap your arms around that client in many different ways, it's just a better relationship. So being able to come with this advice and now this kind of background knowledge into psychometric testing, communication styles, and how it can help their business, I think that's a really great tool in their tool belt for advisors that are listening right now to have that next conversation with a prospect or with a longtime client. I think it'll be really, really beneficial.
Yeah.
So Karin, I know there's a lot of advisors listening right now that are going to want to access formal psychometric testing. How do they do it?
Well, you know what? They can call me. I'd be more than happy to spend some time with them and just walk them through the assessments and give them those selling features and selling points and answer any questions that they may have. And I'm available at any point to do that.
And remember, everyone, Karin is a high I. Okay, so before you reach out, make sure that you do a little bit of research so you guys can connect really effectively. We want this to go really smooth. So listen, Karin, thank you so much. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Matthew. It was great to be here.
And there you have it, folks. Another episode of 18-Minute Experts is in the books. Remember, the insights shared here are just the beginning of our journey together. To stay updated on future episodes, hit that subscribe button on YouTube or Spotify. When it comes to navigating the complexities of group benefits, knowledge is power. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay empowered. Until next time.